So, Dumb Money is the biopic about the 2021 GameStop short squeeze. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this event in which the GameStop stock shot up incredibly in early 2021, and it was just like this whole movement of people who were trying to buy up as much stock as they could and try to essentially kind of like make hedge fund managers pay and more or less try to like either get rich or teach people a lesson. Although, it's a little bit debatable because here's the thing, like in the time since this short squeeze, this event, there's been at least 2 documentaries on this. And the documentaries are pretty much on the same level. They're all looking at this from the perspective of the people involved who made the short squeeze happen, and who were buying up stock and trying to make this work. And basically trying to, it was basically framed as kind of like a fight between those who barely had any money during the pandemic and hedge fund managers who were making tons of money. So this was more or less, at least from the perspective of those involved, a way to make them pay. And there's a lot of ways you could go with adapting the story. And I think, like, I feel like some people are going to look at this with, like, the big cast that they have and think that this is going to be akin to something like The Big Short, in which they take a financial story about stocks and then try to make sense of it all. And the film is not quite that, like, analytical as The Big Short, because like The Big Short actually slowed down and stopped to explain to you the ins and outs of how all of this works. And Dumb Money does not do that. It's trying to be like a more involving story from like the perspective of those who were buying up the stock and their reasons for doing it, which honestly, if you actually do look at like all the data and everything like that, it was more of an emotional drive than it was one that made analytical sense. So it was more or less like a revolution fueled not so much by wanting to make money as much as it was trying to feel like you were doing something about getting back at hedge fund managers. So at the center of the story is Keith Gill, played by Paul Dano, who is, like the first person who was like, I'm holding out for the GameStop stock. I've done all my homework. I live stream about it. I post all my data up for everyone to see, and I'm telling everyone that, I can make this work. I'm going to keep buying up stock in GameStop, and I'm going to make it work. And of course, everyone thinks this is ridiculous. They're like, GameStop, the video game retailer during the pandemic when everyone buys stuff online, like no one can see it. But, Keith's wife sticks with him through it, even though that they have a kid as well. And soon enough, the more that he keeps at it, other people start joining in. They buy up stocks. They decide, life sucks right now. I barely got any money. What would it hurt? Just throw a few bucks at it, just see what happens. And as more people kept throwing money at it and buying stock, GameStop's stock shot up. And this made some of the hedge fund managers a little bit antsy, I guess. Like the film does a good job at kind of portraying like how Gabe Plotkin, played by Seth Rogen, was the most concerned about the money that they were going to lose from GameStop being shot up as much as it was, because the hedge fund managers, if that stock was going down, they felt like they were getting some money from it, but when it shoots up, they're essentially losing money. Like there's more to it. There's a lot of mechanics involved, but that's the basics of it. That's kind of like whittled down to make this story work. The other hedge fund managers, who are played by Nick Offerman playing Kenneth Griffin, and Vincent D'Onofrio playing Steve Cohen, they're not sweating too much. They realize like, oh, okay, there's a little bit of a shakeup here, but we're pretty sure that we can get around this. And at least from the perspective of the film, it portrays him as basically kind of like tinkering with the workings of the stock buying app Robinhood to try to make sure that GameStop would not keep going up in stock. And there's a lot more to the story than that, as I learned further. And even even when I was watching like the documentaries on this, I felt like there was a heavy bias on this, and there was like a bigger story not being told here, because a lot of people who were involved with this were looking at it from the perspective of like the online meme culture. They saw it as like a revolution, you know, which is like, it made sense to them. It was a simple thing. Buy stock in GameStop and you don't sell it. You stick with it. They had this whole motto of like, diamond hands, and hold the stock, don't sell it. Just keep buying it to make it go up and up and up and up. And we'll make these hedge fund managers pay. And it feels like that was kind of all they were trying to do, even though a lot of them were kind of like maybe hoping that they'd make a lot of money with this, which they technically were, but it's a matter of like, well, how long are you going to hold out for? You know, how long is this going to keep going for? And when you actually think about what the ultimate end goal was of the short squeeze in all this, it doesn't really make all that much sense. And I think like that's one of the good reasons why this film doesn't try to be like The Big Short, where it's trying to divulge that. Because if you actually do look further into this, like there's a great video by Dan Olson on this called like This Is Financial Advice, which does a great job cutting through a lot of more than just like the memes. Because like the biggest criticism of this film is that it gets lost in the muck of the online culture, which is, it's a benefit to understanding why people did this, but it also doesn't fully explain, like the mechanics of how this would work, and how a lot of people were kind of walking into a financial trap here. Because ultimately, in the end, a few people who did sell ended up making money, and a lot who didn't just kind of ended up right back in the hole again. And even after like the investigation into like the hedge fund managers and Robinhood, and when all that concluded, ultimately barely anyone on the 1% paid that much. It was kind of like there was a little bit of an effect on how like Wall Street observes stocks and how they're regulated, but just like a small amount. Like it's a tiny, really in the grand scheme of things, it's a bit of like a tiny dent when all things are considered with this. But like, you try to make it like relatable, and I guess like from the perspective of those who are buying up stock, I think it works. I think there's a much bigger story to be told here, but you're trying to make this film in under 2 hours. You're trying to make it entertaining. And the best way to do that is to, make it a simple underdog story of championing for the little dogs. And you have some pretty good performances here. Like you have American Ferrera playing this, this nurse who is a single mother who's at her wit's end, just trying to find a way to make some money. You have Anthony Ramos playing a GameStop clerk who's just had enough of GameStop and wants to feel like he has some ownership in it. You have two college students who are both in debt, so of course they have stakes that they want to, like they have a stake in the stock as well. So you get to see a few different stories in all this. But it's very telling that the biggest criticism of this movement is Keith's brother, played by Pete Davidson, who essentially just calls everyone doing this nerds. Like basically like, oh, I don't understand it. Whatever. They're doing nerd stuff. They're posting memes. The most mild of criticism for this movement. And make no mistake, there's a lot of criticism for this. Even if you're not all that familiar with the short squeeze, you can see like there is stuff worth criticizing. Like in particular, they use a lot of ableist slurs in this movement to try to identify themselves. They're trying to be edgy. They're trying to use like slurs and stuff like that, and it's something that's barely questioned. In fact, even when the film brings it up, it tries to skate around them. Like at one point, Gabe is looking at like a headline in which they are using ableist slurs, and he's almost kind of like questioning it like off to the side, like, wait, are they sure they want to use that language? Are they sure this is good for them? At another point, the Reddit profile of not Reddit, the subreddit of Wall Street Bets is criticized for people acting creepy in there and making weird threats, and it's just kind of brush off. It's like, oh, the moderators handled it, not a big deal. And then later on, the subreddit is taken down, and they say like, well, okay, they use a little bit of edgy language here and there, but that's not a big reason to take it down. And it's kind of like, there's so many aspects of this that you feel a lot of people are uncritical of, where it could be dismantled easily, and it's not questioned all that much within there. I mean, if you're looking at this film critically, you can kind of see like, yeah, okay, you should have addressed this, maybe don't have that there. There's a lot of stuff here that does not age well. In particular, like they try to champion Elon Musk for interviewing one of the people from Robinhood. Thankfully, there's a much better interview of someone who grills the Robinhood CEOs on this, which is weird because you have both those interviews and it feels like one has a lot more emotional depth than Elon Musk's response in all this. Not to mention the fact that there's memes championing Elon in this, which is, it has not aged well. So yeah, like I'm a little bit conflicted about this film because, like, on the one hand, yes, it is uncritical of the Wall Street Bets movement and everything that Keith assembled and the people behind it. But on another level, it's tightly edited. It's got some fine performances, and in terms of being staged as an underdog story, I feel like it works. And I also feel like it avoids a lot of landmines that you could step on when you make this type of story. So they stage it in a way that you want to cheer on, like Keith and all these people, to stick it to the hedge fund managers, even though in the grand scheme of things, they weren't doing a whole lot when you actually like dig down deep into it, besides just, buying up stocks and just like going online and like, posting on YouTube like, oh, let's go and here's memes and all this. It's just like there's a much deeper story to be told here, and I feel like further down the line we will probably get that story. I will say though that in terms of like trying to cover all this and trying to make sense of it all, from a very like GameStop short squeeze, for dummies type of angle, it mostly works. The performances work. It frames itself decently as an underdog story, and on that level, I like the film. But on another level, yeah, it's got some concerning elements. So it's a very well made film, even though it's very uncritical of a lot of elements which are worth criticizing. But hey, at least an audience will be able to better understand the short squeeze a bit more, instead of just writing it off. It's just like, oh, the stock went up for a while and people did some bizarre stuff. Because I feel like there's a personal angle that, for those who didn't take notice of this or weren't quite, or, like generations from now who aren't quite familiar with it, might not understand the mindset of those who went along with this movement. Because in particular, I remember seeing one post on social media from someone saying, like I've got nothing, my job is paying nothing. I don't have any money for retirement. I can't afford a house. I can barely afford my car. I can't afford anything. So I'm just going to hang on to this GameStop stock and just try to make these hedge fund managers pay. Like, I don't care about getting rich or anything. I just want to make someone pay for the way that the world is. Which is, it's a bit depressing, and I wish like the film laid in more to that darkness. It does a little bit towards the end of the film, but I wish that it highlighted that a lot more, because there was a desperation and there was a need to make it feel like you wanted to stick it to Wall Street in some way. And that's the biggest thing that drove the GameStop short squeeze. So for highlighting that aspect, I really do like the film. Although a much bigger conversation needs to be had about it, which hopefully we will get more of in the future.